Thank you very, very much. Glad to have everybody here. Love doing things in person. It seems we do fewer and fewer of them in person, but we'll be getting back into those a lot as we get into the new year. Lots of great programming coming up. Talk about new plants, and that's what is it exactly? Does that mean? Does it mean new to us here at the Arboretum? Does it mean things that we've newly learned about how they perform here after many years? Some things we watch and we evaluate and then decide that they're great plants. Some of them are, new on the market that maybe not new to us. Sometimes we get plants early and we grow them for a while and we get to see them, see what's happening. So we'll be talking about a little of all of that. This is going to be a little bit loose tour because I was unsure how many people would be out here. So, some areas of the garden are a little bit harder to get into than others with a larger group. I do want to mention that January 25th, I and our new director of horticulture, Greg Page, will be having our garden conversation about some of the changes that are coming in the Arboretum. So you're going to see some of that as we walk around today. Some of those the mess before they're actually gardens. So we'll be going in depth about that in a few weeks. So we can talk about that then. Before we get going, anybody have questions? Something they want to see, want me to talk about while we're going? Great. Talk about anything. As always, when we do these tours, I love hearing all of y'all's input, thoughts, reactions, disagreements, all of that with what I'm saying. I know a lot of y'all are fantastic gardeners and so have had different experiences than I have, and I love hearing that. So with that, we'll get going. All right. So the first plant here is it's a genus that actually a species that I first grew maybe 25 years ago when I was in coastal Virginia. Rhododendron, specifically Rhododendron Championi. Now, Rhododendron, or people try and make up common names for things that don't have common names. I've heard it called Hong Kong rose. I've heard it called Chinese rose hazel. I don't know. Rhododendron. Just as easy to learn a Latin name as a new name. The rhododendron that is somewhat in the trade now is Rhododendron henryi, which is been considered the hardiest of the forms. Even that can be a little tricky for us. Rhododendron Championi is very much a southern species. And what had been in the trade at one point here, it was basically 8B hardy at most. This was one we grew out from seed. Now you can see it's not a new plant to us, but it was one we grew out from seed that we collected in South China Botanic Garden, which is fully tropical. And we grew out quite a few seedlings. Many succumbed the first time they got a hint of cold. But this one has been the hardiest that we've found so far. It actually even seems to be hardier than Rhododendron henryi. I have pictures from several years where we've had cold weather, and we've had other Rhododendron completely die. We've had the henryi's get really blasted, and this particular Rhododendron Championi not getting damaged almost at all. And you can see in single digits, the new growth did not get affected at all on here. So we put the name Winter Champion on this because it's been so hardy. Now, it does not look like it has any flower buds this year. They didn't get killed in the cold. It just, for whatever reason, didn't set any flower buds, unfortunately. Last year was the first year that it flowered. When it flowers, it's usually late winter. It has buds held on long peduncles, long stems. It's kind of round, fuzzy buds at the end. Kind of interesting looking. But then when it opens in very early spring, it opens to these brilliant fuchsia colored flowers about 1.5 to 2 inches across. It's a relative of our witch hazels, but it's pretty hard to see that family resemblance, as this is a glossy evergreen tree with these big showy flowers and not just the little strappy petaled ones. We're working on propagating this and getting this into the hands of other people and planting it out in some different areas to really evaluate for hardiness. This is a somewhat protected spot, so it does get a little more protection than it would out in the open garden. But we did have another one planted out in very open spot that did very well at Juniper Level Botanic Garden, and it was dug and moved and didn't survive the transplant. But luckily, we had another one, so we're making sure to back it up and get it out to other people's hands. Any questions on Rhododendron? Yeah.
How are you going to propagate it?
Cuttings.
And does that do that well?
Yeah, it does pretty well. We've mostly done it from summer cuttings, but it should do, I would bet dollars to donuts that this would root pretty well. So yeah, it hadn't been a difficult plant to propagate in general. Really, it's been an expensive plant. The Rhododendron henryi that's out there has been an expensive plant, mostly because there's limited cutting material on any plant, and it's not available, very much in the trade. So the few people who do propagate it can command a pretty good price for it, because where else are you going to get it? And this one, you're not going to get it anywhere else but here right now.
How quickly does it grow? How much a year?
So it's, once it gets going, it tends to be, between 8 and maybe 18 inches a year. If it's really happy, it'll push out quite a bit of growth. We don't like to push our plants with excess fertilizer. One, because we want to see what they'll do in kind of, our normal garden soil, but also, especially with something that's can be borderline tender. The more you push it, the more chance that you'll lose some hardiness to it. So this has been we have had this for quite a few years, and it's been here. It's just in the last few years that we've really its cold hardiness has really impressed us that much, and that we've put a name on it. Other questions? Yes. Deer will eat it. Yeah, we'll plant other ones out once we have them going in some much more exposed spots. But one nice thing about Rhododendron is it's perfectly happy in some shade, and the difference you get in temperatures under like high pine shade or high deciduous shade, you get anywhere from 4 to 8 degrees difference than out in the open. And so these plants that can be a little borderline, if you plant them in some shade, if they're the type of plant that perform well, you really can move yourself at least half a zone warmer by doing that. But like I said, this has been really good out in full sun. It'd be interesting. It was an interesting cold that we just had. Ground was very, very wet. So it was really retaining quite a bit of heat. So even though we got down into single digits, there was still a lot of heat being retained in the ground. And then it was very windy, which if the ground had been dry for a while and the plants had been, evergreen plants especially had not been under drought stress because it's wintertime, they're not doing a lot of transpiring, but if they weren't really fully hydrated and we had all that wind come through, you'd have seen a lot more damage. But since everything was so fully hydrated and there was that warmth in the ground, it's amazing how little wind damage we got on our plants. It's been interesting to walk through, and it goes back to something that is always a kind of an issue, is that we look at the cold temperature and we think that tells us everything. Oh, it died. It got down to 8 degrees. It's not hardy down to 8 degrees. Oh, it lived through 8 degrees. It means it's hardy to 8 degrees. But it's always about, there's all these other factors. You know, the big one for places like us is how fast did it get cold? How warm was it leading up to it? We had some warm weather, but overall, we've had a pretty cool season. Things were dormant for the most part. So that helps with the cold. And while it did drop quickly, it didn't drop from 65 to 25. It dropped from, low 50s really down to single digits. And so at 50, around 50s, things are not really doing much. They're pretty dormant, whereas things are trying to grow when you're up in 65 and 70 degrees. The moisture in the ground, like I said, that really helped. Now, you'll hear winter wet is bad for plants. That can kill a lot of plants, and that's true, but that's winter wet over a long period, over much of the winter, as opposed to the ground was fully saturated when we got cold that one time. It's amazing, even agaves in fairly moisture-retentive soil did better than expected. Some marginally hardy ones, because of that warmth that was held, the heat that was retained in the soil. So there's all these different factors when we look at that. And as we walk through, you'll see some plants that may look a little bit battered up or dead, but most things were in great shape.
Behind you is a sago palm with one branch that looks perfect. I think that's because it was closer to the wall and the heat came off the wall, or what would you guess?
Yeah, I think that this one frond there, it was kind of covered by other fronds. It was by a wall, although you can see the wall got cold because there's lots of dead creeping fig leaves on there. The creeping fig itself will be just fine, as will the cycad. This is the sago palm, Cycas revoluta. Again, in a protected spot, but as long as the growth point here is alive, it'll be fine. So most winters we cut off the fronds on this, and it'll put up a new set of fronds. So
these are dead.
Yeah, those are dead. We'll leave them up all winter because they do provide some protection around the plant. So we'll leave it there, but we'll cut them off, as soon as it warms up and the new fronds start coming out. All right, I'm gonna stay right here. We're just do it all right. No, but I do want to. I asked what is a new plant, and so I want to mention this plant, this palm tree, which has been grown for decades and decades as Sable Brazoria or Sable Brazoria Texas. Because it's this weird palm that nobody could figure out what it was. And so he just put it as a kind of a cultivar name. And it's somewhere between some of the Mexican cabbage palms, sables, and sable, our native, some of our eastern natives. Grown from Brazoria, Texas. There's a population of them from there. This was actually one seedling collected down there. And it's only been in recent years, in the last 5 to 8 years, that enough work has been done with them, enough study by mostly by the Montgomery Botanic Center down in Florida, to be able to say that this is a hybrid species for sure. It was always kind of assumed that, so it got a new name, Sable X Brazoriensis, and it is a very hardy plant, very big growing plant. Doesn't get tall. It has a short, stubbier trunk, but you can see the fronds and the petioles just get enormous on this. So it's one of the, in my mind, one of the showiest palms. And like a lot of these palms. You put it in the ground and it's a cute little thing. It's a cute little thing and then you walk by and you're like, oh my gosh, it got big.
You know how old that one is?
Oh, let's see. Trying to think when it went in the ground. We got it in 2008. It was in a 3-gallon pot, and then it sat in the nursery for years and years and years being abused. And I think we probably put it in around 2012, 14. So, 10 years old, but from a pretty abused plant that went in. Has not flowered for us, or so we haven't had seed from it yet, but it's a neat plant. So while it's a plant that's been grown for decades, it's newly named. So what is a new plant? Here we go with a plant that is when the nursery industry, some of the local wholesale nurseries are really excited about. This is our native Juniperus virginiana, red cedar. You see it growing down the medians of highways and, kind of along the way. This was one that we noticed in North Florida or South Georgia. I always forget where I actually saw it. It was somewhere right on that border, and we have it in our records, but that kind of gives you the idea of where it was. But it was this very, very extremely narrow form with really beautiful silver blue foliage. It gets a little off color in winter like you see now, but during most of the year, it is just really gorgeous silvery blue. And obviously grows very upright, relatively quick grower. So we've been growing it for a while. We finally put the name Silver Spear on it. Really, we put the name on it because we were offering one that we had propagated in one of our auctions. So I had to call it something other than Fastigiate Blue, which is what we had been calling it. One of the things that really impresses me about it, you can kind of see at the base of this one over here how it's curved a little bit. I have pictures of this when it first went in, and it was kind of almost laying on its side. It was almost bushy round, while this one at the same time was this cute little cone. And I left this one in just to see what it would do, because a lot of times these fastigiate plants, if a tip gets broken or something happens, it never grows up. And this thing, you can see it caught up. It's not quite, hadn't gotten quite as tall. It took it a year or two to really catch up to and go upright. But in terms of form, it's still keeping that same really great fastigiate columnar form. One of the biggest sellers for nurserymen right now is something that they just cannot grow enough of, is a red cedar called Taylor, which grows very much like this, except for it is very green as opposed to that silvery blue. So we just sent off, I don't know how many dozen cuttings to a nursery that grafts red cedar onto Hetz juniper. It just makes it a little bit tougher in the landscape. Less likely to blow over in wind events and that kind of thing. So it roots pretty easily, though, and sometimes red cedar does not root very well. That's the other reason it's grafted often. But they are very, very excited about this and think this could be a very, very big seller for them in the area. Yeah.
When you take cuttings, are you taking up the branches, or do you have to take the
Yeah, this is very, very strongly upright. So yeah, you can take it from the branches and it'll still go upright. And it's a great question. There are some conifers which are what they call plagiotrophic, and so that means if you take a branch that's going sideways and you root it, it will want to grow sideways forever. Not really, but for long time, sometimes decades before going up. some of the broadleaf conifers are very much like that, but also sequoia. Well, I don't know about sequoia. Sequoia dendron can do that, and there are some cultivars, old cultivars from England, where the same clone, if it's growing flat, has one name, and then after 10, 20 years, sometimes it'll go straight up, and that upright form has a different cultivar name, even though genetically they are identical. There's a few like that. I mean, most people have no idea because you buy it grafted or rooted, so you either buy the flat one or the upright one. But if you buy the flat one, at some point it'll want to go up. So kind of 2 for 1. You get, rooting it. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah, so the first question that I answered kind of at length was whether you can take cuttings of the branches and they'll still go up instead of going outright. And the answer was yes on this plant. Next question was, I mentioned that red cedar is often hard to root. We have not had trouble rooting this plant. We have not tried to root a whole lot of it, and we've had great success when we had. That is generally the perfect recipe for us to have terrible success the next time we do it. But generally, we've had good luck with this one, whereas other ones that we have in the garden that we have tried to propagate have been terribly difficult to root. And this. These came from cuttings. This was a big tree out in on the side of the road that I took cuttings from in mid-October when I saw it. So yeah, it will root. It's all about timing. This is a myrtle, common myrtle, Myrtus communis, the Mediterranean plant. Great fragrant foliage. Usually the foliage is quite a bit larger on this. The shrub becomes a pretty large shrub, and it's not hardy for us. It will not survive our winters. It will not survive cold winters. It will survive, very mild winters for us. But I've tried to grow it and just doesn't survive. And this really does not look a whole lot like the common myrtle. It's such a small leaf. It's so fine textured. But this is one that came to us as cuttings from the Elizabeth Lawrence garden. And it's been growing in the Elizabeth Lawrence garden for, I don't know how long, ages. We have several plants in here. You can see some of them are a little more damaged than others, but all of these were dug and moved late summer to come in here. So they were growing in another spot in the garden and, were moved. And this was the one that was growing the best after transplant. The others were already struggling. And we got some discolored leaves on here, but they're actually not even, for the most part, not even dead leaves. The interior is still nice and green. It's making this great little shrub. It did flower, so it has little white flowers for us. It's another one that I think has some real potential as an herb garden plant, low hedging plant, something you can always myrtle you can prune into hedges and things like that if you like. But I'm after watching this for several years, I've become more and more and more impressed with it. So it doesn't really have a cultivar name or anything like that on it. We'll probably call it Elizabeth Lawrence, something to that effect, just to denote which one it is. Interestingly, I was talking about this with somebody else nearby, and they were showing me, actually before I talked to them about this, they were showing me a little tiny leafed hardy common myrtle. And I said, oh, we've got that. It's from Elizabeth Lawrence. We did some digging. Theirs came from a different source completely, so we're not quite sure if they're exactly the same thing or not. But we need to trade with each other and grow these plants out. But they do, like a lot of those herbs, they are aromatic. So you would infer that they're probably not going to be deer's favorite food. I will not swear to that, so don't blame me. But you'd hope anyway. All right, I lied to y'all a little bit because I don't have the name for it yet. It has been named, but this is brand new, so new that we only have the name in our system yet. I think it's sitting in an email in my inbox, the name, but this is one of Denny Werner's, and he shares the credit with the Arboretum because most of his plants came from the Arboretum, and much of the work breeding this came while he was here and working with us. But this is brand new red bud. It's just gotten this fall, got put in the hands of growers to start grafting it and growing it and sending it out. This is basically a dwarf weeping purple leaf red bud. So if you know Ace of Hearts, which has those little leaves, that perfect leaf arrangement, but is green leaf, it's got those kind of small leaves. It's weeping, gets the weeping from Traveler, I believe, is the weeping, where it gets the weeping habit from. I may be wrong about that. And then the purple from, the Ace of Hearts, from Forest Pansy, or I'm not sure if it was actually Forest Pansy that was used in it. But it is very, very distinctive. And some of you have maybe heard me talk about this, but color in foliage comes from through different mechanisms. In red bud, to date, all the colorful leaf forms, not splashed variegation, but the purples and the golds come. There's 3 layers of leaves: the L1, L2, L3. So L2 is in the middle, and that's the thickest layer of leaves, of cells. And it's pretty much, for most broadleaf plants, there are those 3 layers. And so you have usually a thin outer layer, a thin bottom layer, and then what they call palisade cells, which are taller in the middle. And the color, the purple color on red buds, is in that L1 layer, that top layer. And so when it emerges, that L1 layer is as thick or thicker than any of the other ones. So it's really dark, dark purple. As the leaf expands and gets bigger and bigger, more and more of that middle layer, that's what's getting bigger and bigger, more and more of that middle layer shows through. And that's why so many purple leaf plants in the South don't stay dark purple. They get that kind of muddy and will go almost completely to green. It isn't that the purple is going away, it's just the green is coming through that. So if you're breeding with purple leaf red buds, that's the only purple that's there. So they're all going to do that. So with Myrtle, one of our other introductions, a purple leaf Texensis type, which has a thicker leaf already, and that's that L2 layer is thicker on there. It stays purple even less long. Well, this has little tiny leaves. And so you don't get that middle layer, that middle green layer, expanding so much and taking away the purple. So even as a young plant, this stays much darker purple for us than any of the Forest Pansy, Burgundy Hearts, Merlot, Ruby Falls, any of these other plants. This one stays much, much darker. So I think it's going to be really exciting. Plus, it's the size for small landscapes. It doesn't get very big. Now you can train it up. You can see the length of these branches. This is a little bit wonky shaped because this is the original plant, and all of those cuttings for cyanwood that were sent out for grafting came from this plant. So it's been nipped and chopped and things for quite a while. So it's a little wonky, but we're really excited about it and wish I could remember the name, but look for it. It'll be a couple of years before it is really available, because it's grafted this fall, late summer. It'll grow all next season. Those are liner producers. The liner producers will dig it. They will send it to other nurseries who will then pot it up into 3 and 5 and 15-gallon pots, or plant it out in the field, and they will grow it bigger. Bigger. So you got another few years. So it'll take a while before you'll be able to see this, but I think it's a real breakthrough plant. We do have another one that hasn't been named. I'm not sure if it will. We do have a green leaf form of this as well. This dwarf ace of hearts, small leaf weeping plant. So this is a cross that was made in 2017. So that's pretty quick to get it up. That's it was an advanced cross, so it wasn't like we took Ace of Hearts and Ruby Falls and crossed them. This was several generations past that. So this, to get here, it started 30 or so years ago to get to this point where we're getting this kind of plant. Yeah. Question was about a plant that's not here. There was a really nice, beautiful white bark Platinous Suttoneri. That was.
Who stole it?
Who stole it? No, it started having some real structural problems, and we had to take it out, unfortunately. It is in the trade a little bit. So, it is a good sycamore for us. It's actually variegated, but it didn't variegate much.
These things pop up with these things?
Oh, sure. So, question was about a little plant that's popping up all over. This is Aerometallicum. So this is a little aeroid, related to elephant ears and erythemas and amorphophallus and those types of things.
It looks like it'd be like growing no matter what.
Well, it grows in winter.
Okay.
So it'll go dormant for summer, and then in winter, it pops up, which is why a lot of people like them. And there's some beautiful named forms. These are just all seedlings. The problem with them is, and if you can look around the Arboretum and see, they seed. So they have think Jack in the Pulpit flower, but without a stalk. So right at the ground, they have a white spathe and the flower inside there, just like a peace lily. Think peace. And then they get these beautiful orange-red berries, little stalk of orange-red berries, real showy. And that's, as the leaves go dormant and you've got these little stalks here and there, they're gorgeous. Well, those seeds germinate all over the place. So really, if you want to grow grow arums, you need to cut the seed heads off, or better yet, just cut the flowers off when they show up. We're going to be removing arums all over. That is a goal in the coming year or two. And honestly, it's a plant that has me a little bit concerned, because people love it because it comes up during the winter when everything else, all the other perennials are going dormant. It's popping up. And if you don't make the effort to cut those flowers or the fruit stalks off and get rid of them, they're going to invade other places. Now, I don't know that they'll displace other plants, because I don't know that they'll compete with our native plants so much, but they sure will change the character of our woodlands and things. So that's part of the reason we're getting rid of them. We'll still grow some named forms that are really exceptional, but we'll also try and make sure people understand, how to keep them in check.
I've never seen any.
No, they're very cold hardy plants. In fact, they need that summer dormancy. They'd probably not do well as a house plant. This is another red bud. Another of our brand new releases with Denny Werner. This is Cerseus Gilded Hearts. Technically, I guess it's Cerseus NC 2014-10, and then the trade name is Gilded Hearts. Know there's several gold-leafed red buds out there. There's the Rising Sun. There's Hearts of Gold, which introduced by a former JC Raulston Arboretum staff member. So there are already a couple out there, and there are probably more that are have been named that aren't as good. Gilded Hearts is a little different though, because this is a gold-leafed Texensis type. So this is a gold leaf coming from the parentage of the Texensis is Oklahoma, is Texas white. So the Texensis types have a much thicker, glossier leaf than our eastern type of red bud. Tend to be a little bit more rounded at the tip than that pointed acute or acuminate tip from our other ones. But in other respects are generally pretty similar in terms of flowering and size and shape. Now, I don't know exactly in that L1, L2, L3 layer where the gold is in there. I need to ask Denny Werner that because he knows, I'm sure. But you know, that gold holds up much better than the purple does for us. And when you put it on that glossy leaf, that glossy thick leaf, it really, really sparkles. I mean, it reflects the light, it grabs your attention, and it holds that color for a long, long period, which makes me think that yellow is maybe in the L1 layer as opposed to, in the L2 layer as opposed to the L1, or perhaps both, because that can happen as well. Denny, the breeder who did this, former director here, is often now, he's retired, so he's often away at a place where his daughters live and grandchildren. So he's not around, he's around here to see how this is performing. So I have a series of pictures throughout the months of this. So, sometimes I think a plant is great and then I, watch it a little bit more. I'm like, well, maybe it isn't. But here I have photographic proof that it's gold. It stays that gold. It doesn't burn. That's the Texensis types are much better in full sun, more drought tolerant, just all around really better landscape plants than just straight Cerseus canadensis. So this is pretty exciting. And as opposed to Merlot, which is tougher than forest pansy, has a better growth habit than forest pansy, but doesn't keep color nearly as good as forest pansy. This actually, the gold is improved on a tougher, easier to grow plant. So Gilded Hearts, this one I think is going to be a huge, huge success.
Is there any difference in ones?
No, I sometimes hear people saying Texensis plants are smaller. I think they're maybe a little slower growing, but no, because there are, well, let me take that back. They are a little smaller because they're slower growing. They will ultimately catch up, but size-wise, pretty similar. Yeah, and so the comment was is an eastern red bud that was huge, and they can get large. The eastern red bud can get large, and there are some genetics in them. There are some forms that will get very, very large. We have some here that we really thought must be hybrids with an Asian species, but when we did some genetic testing, they were straight Cerseus canadensis, but they are the most vigorous things we've ever seen. I mean, they are just out of this world. The question was, is it sterile? I don't know that. Yeah, we've had a little bit of good seed in here. I don't know how the inheritance looks on this in terms of, what you would get with the next generation. And we have not grown this long enough to know if it is somewhat sterile and you won't get a lot of seed on there, or if it's like some other ones that if it's a good year, it'll be loaded with seed, which I understand some people don't like. I kind of like it, but I'm weird that way. So is this several years away from market? Yes. This is a few years older than the other plant we looked at. It will, wood was sent off a little bit earlier, so it's maybe a year or two away from entering the market, and several more years from entering in any kind of major way. Okay. I mentioned that some plants just kind of hang around and we don't pay attention to them much. This is a case of a plant that we paid attention to years and years ago and then kind of stopped paying attention to it. This is a camellia. This is Camellia Olifera. Camellia Olifera, the oil camellia. After it flowers, it makes great big seed that are pressed for oil. It's actually really good oil. It's on par health-wise with olive oil in terms of having the good fats as opposed to bad fats, but it has a very, very high smoke out temperature. So rather than olive oil, you can't really fry things at a high temperature because it'll start to burn and smoke. But that's why you use peanut oil or other vegetable oil to fry chicken or something like that, high temperatures. But camellia oil won't smoke out at a high temperature. It'll go almost as hot as peanut oil. So it's really interesting. And there are some folks in the U.S. working on oil camellias as an industry. You're not growing it for that. Those selections have a lot of seeds, and we generally don't want that. But what's great about oil camellias, Camellia Olifera, is they are probably the hardiest species in general of all camellias. When I have people up north who want to grow camellia, I say, well, try Camellia Olifera. That's a better bet than the sasanquas, the japonicas, any of them. And with age, they get a beautiful, beautiful bark. So many years ago, we noticed a few seedling Camellia Olifera. We have a very nice, beautiful one up by our white garden, gorgeous bark, beautiful green foliage, gets nice single white flowers, kind of the petals are a little separated so it's not that flat kind of look. I think it's beautiful. I like single flowered camellias more than I like the big honking things. Personal thing. But there were a few of them, and two of them looked like typical Camellia Olifera. But this one, as a little plant, was like kind of this little green mound. Was that weeping? It kind of looks like it's weeping. And so, well, let's get rid of these other two because they're weeds. Let's keep this one and keep an eye on it. And so we did. And this was, 12 years ago, maybe. And in the meantime, we had an osmanthus in front of it, and I love my osmanthus. And so, it grew big, got another osmanthus behind it, and in an area that was honestly somewhat neglected in the Arboretum. And it kind of passed, kind of was out of sight, out of mind a little bit. Every once in a while, I'd look in and see it was still here. But we've removed some plants, which put this back out in the open. And so this is a plant that's been really had a lot of competition, isn't looking its best, but it is definitely a weeping form of Camellia Olifera. It doesn't have a name on it. We will probably put a name on it. We'll propagate it and have a bunch of them, and then we'll put it in a sale or an auction, and then we'll say, oh gosh, we need to put a name on it since we're letting it out of here. So what should we call it? And, so if you have suggestions, you can give those early, and maybe we'll get it early on. But it still flowers well, fairly well for us. You can see some remnants of flowers on here. but in this kind of nice cascading shape. So it'll be really interesting once we propagate it to get it out in a more open spot, less competition, and see how fast it'll grow into a sizable plant. That makes a difference for whether it ever gets into the nursery industry or not, and how it grows. Both trying to train it up and letting it go down from a single trunk and cascade over, but also just letting it grow as a camellia shrub. One of the nice things about Camellia olifera, and it's not quite showing yet, but it has one of my favorite barks on a tree. It is this beautiful, not quite cinnamon, but smooth, gorgeous bark. I love the one by our white garden. I love the bark on it. Any questions? Oh, you can do these from winter cuttings. I find camellias generally easy to propagate in most cases, so at any time.
What was that?
This stump was a Osmanthus Fruitlandii from the old Fruitland nursery.
You leave the stump?
Depends on where the stump is. We grind them mostly, or cover them with a lot of soil. At my house, what I do in my woodland when I'm taking out trees and I have something, I cut it as close to flush as possible, and then I'll score it, do like a pound signal sign or a hashtag if you're younger, and that just helps water to settle into it a little bit, and it rots a little quicker. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. The question was, if we were to take the cuttings from this upright down here, would we be less likely to get a weeping form? And that's a head scratcher for me, because that's definitely growing very much upright. And he's a young plant even, we could tell this was different. If you showed me this and I hadn't known this plant since it was a wee lad or lass, I would tell you, oh, this is grafted, and that's coming up from rootstock. But we know this isn't grafted, so we know it isn't a different rootstock. So it would be interesting. Roots can be somewhat, it's not exactly genetically different, and I am reaching the very end of my my knowledge, so I'm not going to go further than that. But you can definitely get from an ungrafted plant something different coming from roots. So it'd actually be pretty interesting to root some of those and see what they do and see if they continue to grow upright, because it shouldn't. Everything should be weeping. We're gonna have to do that. Thank you for the question. I don't have an answer for you, but I'm really interested to find out.
I'll check back in 5 years.
That's right. Shouldn't take that long. These things like this, they show their weeping tendencies pretty early, so be good.
There are some other weeping camellias, aren't there?
There are some other weeping camellias. There's not a lot of them. There's the Tamanohana is upright, but also kind of weeps, and the flowers hang down on there. There are a few of them that are more being grown as ground covers, but if you stake them up, they'll go over. I know there are other ones. Camellia breeding, especially in the U.S., but in Europe, but even in Japan, where a lot of it's traditionally been done, has been on flowers, flower size, flower shape, petal arrangement, and form has never been a high priority. And it drives me crazy, because you can go through and look at 1,000 camellias with gorgeous flowers, and so many of them are just ugly plants. They're open and floppy, and we can get all those big hunking flowers on pretty shrubs. There's some of the societies that where there is a lot of naming of cultivars, you get a lot of chaff in there. You know, camellias are one, daylilies, iris. There are great ones, and they're great amateur breeders. This isn't knocking amateur breeders, home breeders, any of that. It's just because of how the nature of the organization, it makes it so that everybody feels like they can name a cultivar, which is great, except for they all name a cultivar, and a lot of them are of questionable merit at best. So it is one of those groups. So I advise people, like with camellias, go out and see a full-grown plant. Don't look at a picture of a flower and say, yeah, I want that one, because unless you have unlimited space, you know, it's better to get a good one than to get a bad one. All right, well, I've hit my hour limit, which is always painful, because I could stand here and I can show you, 10 more things. But if you have any questions, happy to help. This one?
Yeah.
That's a dogwood. This is Cornus controversa, one of the alternate leaved dogwoods. You can tell if you go out in the woods, if you learn here, you learn mad buck, maple ash, dogwood, and buckeyes are all opposite leaved. That's one of the ways to tell. But there's actually a native dogwood, Cornus alternifolia, that is alternate leaved, that is woefully underused. It's one of the best native small trees anywhere. Birds love the berries. It's a great plant. More people should grow it. But then there's also a couple of Asian ones, Cornus controversa, because the leaves are controverse. And it's like a giant Cornus alternifolia. Have you ever seen the dogwood they sometimes call the wedding cake dogwood? It's a variegated one that's very tiered.
Like a pagoda.
Pagoda, yeah. Cornus alternifolia pagoda is the variegated one of our native, and Cornus controversa variegata is the Asian species. So that's what this is. So much bigger leaves, small flowers and flat clusters, not the large bracted flowers. But real pretty, and pretty fruits, and beautiful tree. All right, well, thank you all for joining me. It's been a pleasure.